morning, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. And my name is Blessy. I'm an independent journalist from India. And I'm really excited to be moderating this very important conversation titled Voices from Underreported Communities. When we speak about religious freedom violations, we often rely on statistics, country reports, and legal frameworks. But what is frequently missing are the voices of the communities that are suffering. And their voices are minimalized, normalized, or simply ignored, not because it is insignificant, but because it's inconvenient, politically sensitive, or difficult to document. So this session is intentionally focused on those voices, and today we'll hear from advocates who work very closely with communities that exist on the margins of the global religious freedom discourse. And they're affected not just by persecution, but by erasure from media narratives, from policy priorities, and even international advocacy spaces. And we have a wonderful set of panelists here today who've committed their lives to bringing these voices out, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. First up, we have Karmella Borashan. She's an Assyrian advocate whose work focuses on the persecution, displacement, and cultural erasure of Assyrian Christians in the Middle East, one of the world's oldest yet most underreported religious communities. Our next speaker is Kamal Fahmi, who is a longtime religious freedom advocate working in the Middle East, particularly on the impact of blasphemy and apostasy laws on converts, dissidents, and religious minorities. Our next panelist is Keyvan Ghaderi, who works with underrepresented religious and belief communities from Iran, focusing on how state repression, surveillance, and identity-based discrimination silence entire populations. And our last panelist today is Funke Adeoye. She's a Nigerian human rights lawyer and the founder of Hope Behind Bars, Africa, whose work exposes how criminal justice systems intersect with religious identity, marginalization, and systemic discrimination. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to engage in this very important conversation. Like most conferences of this scale, we don't have the privilege of much time, so I will ask 2 questions to each of you, and you will have 3 minutes to answer each question. Let me start by asking you, Karmella. The Assyrian community is an ancient community, yet today it is often treated as invisible in discussions about religious persecution. From your experience, how has that normalization of Assyrian suffering, displacement, violence, and cultural erasure contributed to global silence? And what is really lost when communities' persecution becomes expected rather than an urgent issue?
2 questions?
First question, and then
First, I want to thank Earth Summit, and I want to thank you for giving us this platform. Let's go back to the fall of Saddam Hussein, and in 2003, in Syria's civil war. Assyrian Christians in Iraq and Syria experienced a dramatic deterioration, creating a very fertile ground for extremists. Ever since, Assyrians face systematic, subtle persecution from both the jihadists and Kurdish forces, each using different tactics. In Syria, lack of security and economic collapse affects all Syrians, specifically Assyrian Christians as minorities. Many villages that once were very thriving, they remain largely empty. Assyrians mainly live under SDF-controlled autonomous region, but as they promised, and Assyrians believed they could represent a democratic model of governance, but they start assassination, school closure, militarization of religious sites, and marginalization which they realized in practice the authority is in the hand of PYD PKK aligned forces. Ahmed al-Shara, a notorious war criminal, he currently positions as de facto leader, which puts Assyrian Christians and other religious and ethnic minorities in a precarious situation. So Syrian political bodies often are subordinate or symbolic within that region, and 15% of our land has been seized by the autonomous region. In Iraq, they face violent attack by Islamist extremists. Like last year, we had a Kurdish ISIS attack a Syrian parade. There is an organization called Hafpa, a Kurdish neo-Nazi group, registered by KRG, stands in direct threat to the survival of our community. It explicitly calls for genocide of Assyrian Chaldean in Syria. Assyrians struggle political representation as their seats have been hijacked or manipulated by larger parties under KRG and central government. Illegal land grab, appropriation and property continues in Iraq under KRG and central government. Assyrian archaeological sites, more than 3,000 years, are being vandalized. Minority laws, which is forcibly converts children to Islam. So more than 80 churches have been destroyed in Iraq before ISIS, all the way to not too long ago in the KRI region. So with that said, once we had 1.5 million Christians, now we have only less than 300,000 left. As the Christianity is fading from the Middle East and are placed in the mercy of the perpetrators, our community does not have a chance of survival. And what we need in the Middle East is pluralism to bring the foundation of democracy. In order to keep that and be a safe place for European countries and America and other places to remove the jihadi mentality, is to keep Middle East a pluralistic society.
Thank you, Karmella. I'll come back to you. Let me turn now to Kamal. Kamal, much of your work focuses on blasphemy and apostasy laws, which don't just punish belief, but criminalize conscience. How do these laws silence underreported communities? And why do you think their stories still remain so absent, even within religious freedom advocacy?
Yeah, I think apostasy and blasphemy law are violating Article 18, which is freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, and that includes the freedom to change belief. And unfortunately, people don't realize that 1.3 billion Muslims, they don't have the freedom to live Islam. And Sudan was one of these countries where it was death sentence if you live Islam. There is about 11 countries until today they have death sentence. And Sudan has been facing problem with this. We have quite a number of victims who were executed or killed by their community because they left Islam. Most of the time they have to leave the country and to go somewhere else. And also when they leave the country, sadly enough, even within the UN system, they don't get relocation easily. They face problem. I just had a report now, a lady called Sahar and her 3 children, they are facing that they will send them back to Sudan. And in spite Sudan took away the apostasy and blasphemy law during the civilian government. But now, with the insecurity, with the coup of the army, with the fighting of the two factions, ex-Muslims are very vulnerable. And sadly enough, this is not realized internationally, and nobody is working to really stop this. And they look at this as an impossible law which cannot be changed. And we have, many people are suffering under these laws. I remember Funke in Sudan. I remember we have a picture there of the Mahmoud Muhammad Taha who was executed in 1985. So they are facing threats wherever they go, they have no safe place. So it would be great if these laws are abolished. And of course, the problem is the Sharia law, which gives no equality between Muslims and non-Muslims and ex-Muslims. So anybody who leave face this death penalty through the community or through the government. So they are not safe at all.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And you pointed out how these challenges are not internationally recognized, and I think that's what this track is about, to really create that awareness about communities that are suffering.
I have read also a report about Sudan. You can pick one because it is a short time to speak about all the problems people are facing there. So you can pick one before you go. We have some at the end and some here in the front also.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Keyvan. Keyvan, in a highly controlled environment like Iran, persecution doesn't always look dramatic. In Yemen, it often looks bureaucratic, quiet, and constant, right? Can you describe how everyday repression, exclusion, fear shapes the religious life of underreported communities?
Yes, let me begin by expressing something fundamental about Yemen. A country of brave, pure-hearted, and generous people. Yemen is a land where the doors of homes open wide for friends and strangers alike. It's a place of profound hospitality and beauty, a place where I was born and raised. Despite my Iranian roots, and despite my identity as a Baha'i, a faith often misunderstood in a society deeply shaped by its traditional values. But things changed dramatically in 2008 when I was arrested for my beliefs. After 4 months, I was released, but life became increasingly precarious, especially after 2014, when the Houthis assumed de facto control in Yemen. Under their rule, persecutions of Baha'is escalated, reflecting broader societal and political instability. In prison, our faith was tested like never before. The majority of the inmates had never heard of the Baha'i faith. At first, they called us infidels and treated us with suspicion and disdain. They refused to talk to us or share food with us. Over time, however, some of them insisted on eating and talking to us to break down the prison rules established by the authorities. Religious freedom and equal citizenship are not abstract ideals. They are foundations of just and harmonious society. For Yemen, these principles are not only urgent, but essential for healing and rebuilding a nation torn apart by conflict and division. My time in prison reinforced this belief, showing me that even in the harshest circumstances, transformative conversation and actions can take root.
Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your lived experiences. Funke, your work shows how legal and justice systems can themselves become tools of oppression. How does the criminal justice system in Nigeria, through detention, policing, or denial of legal aid, disproportionately impact underreported religious communities?
All right, thank you. So first of all, I would start by just giving a bit of an overview about Nigeria as a country. The fact that Nigeria is a country with over 220 million persons, and it's a very diverse country. And due to the diversity, we find a lot of issues arising when it comes to religion. And when you look at the criminal justice system, there are different ways in which religious bias or religious polarities show up. But I'm going to just talk about two major ways, and that's looking at the justice institutions, like you have mentioned, the policing system, the correctional system, and the judiciary, and also looking at the legal framework. And I will start with the legal framework. The fact that as a country, we have the country ordinarily is supposed to have two major legal framework, which is the criminal code and the penal code. For the criminal code works in the south, while the penal code works in the north. But what we find is we also have the Sharia law, which ordinarily should be for Muslims. But then the Sharia law oftentimes is used not just for the Muslims, but also for the Christians, and sometimes unfairly. And so it shows up in issues of policing. We have something called the Hizbah in the Kano part of Nigeria. It's like a moral police that is supposed to enforce Sharia law for the Muslims. But at times we find that affecting Christians in the northern part of the country in terms of closing down an entire road for a particular religion to worship, in terms of policing dressing, policing alcohol use and all of that. And now taking me to the other conversation around justice system, the fact that we have our justice system, our justice institutions, from the police to the correctional facilities to the judiciary, has over time been unfavorably disposable to a particular religion. When you look at some of the incidences that we've had in the past couple of years, I'll give a very good example. Last year in the news, it was in the news, the case of Sunday Jackson, a man who had been on death row for more than 10 years, was in the news. And basically, when you looked at his entire case, he was assaulted by an assailant from the Muslim religion, and he did not have access to legal counsel, even though he was being, the allegations were allegations that carried the death penalty. And the Constitution basically says that you're entitled to legal counsel, but he didn't have adequate legal counsel. He was sentenced to death at the High Court, down to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. But then when you look at this case from a legal mind, you find that there were lots of inconsistency, there was a lot of bias, and even for Sunday Jackson, who was our client, we did a lot of advocacy around him last year. His life was in danger even while in custody, to the point that he had to be moved to another correctional facility. So we often find that show up in the justice system, and then even in terms of the policing system as well. One of the ways in which freedom of religion is being severely affected is the fact that the policing system is polarized, especially in the middle belt part of the country and in the northern part of the country where we have Christians. So it's polarized, and you're not often certain that when you engage with the justice system, you're going to have access to support, or you're going to be unfairly treated or fairly treated. And also the fact that our government is not usually open to investigations and arrest of people who perpetrate religious violence. And I'll give a very good example, another final example. Last year in November or thereabouts, there was a live situation where a church was attacked. And there was a live stream, so everybody saw the armed men come into the church, shoot at parishioners, killed 3 people, and then 38 were abducted. This was in November last year. And the people, the captives were in custody or wherever it is that they were kept in the kidnappers' den for a couple of days. And the next thing, the government says they have been released. And the question was, where are the assailants? If you were able to get these people out, what happened to the captors? And till date, we don't know what has happened to the captors. The government is silent on that kind of situation. So that's another way that we find the government and the justice system not showing up or not doing its best to protect freedom of religion in that sense.
Thank you for sharing that. Very insightful again, and it just goes to reflect how persecution in many countries is not an exception, but so deeply embedded within the institutions itself. Now, we've talked about awareness of the challenges that your countries face, and for the second set of questions, I want to quickly ask each of you how we can change that narrative. How can we really get these voices heard in international spaces? What are the action steps? So first question to you, Karmella, is what would it require politically and morally for international actors to take Assyrian survival seriously, not just as a matter of humanitarian issue, but as a matter of justice and accountability? Very quickly, if you can answer that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to read this if
Sure.
you don't mind. Assyrian Christians were once a thriving and integral part of Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, respected members of society with a Christian faith of more than 2,000 years when Jesus came. A very powerful evangelistic carried Christianity to the far lands in the world. They have a history of more than 6,000 years. The West has repeatedly failed Assyrian Christians in the Middle East, abandoning them to the prominent powers that have persecuted and massacred them for generations today. Now we have only 3 million to 4 million Assyrians scattered all over the world. They face an even greater threat, silence and abandonment. Placing these ancient people, their Aramaic language and Christianity in the region on the brink of permanent extinction unless decisive action is taken to secure a safe haven. Do not leave us under the local powers, assuming what they write in their constitution is what will be applied. In the Middle East specifically, they don't walk the talk. Iran right now in its constitution has 100% freedom of speech, doesn't mean anything. So we have to be able to create Nineveh Plain Governorate in Iraq and hopefully a Khabur self-administrative region to retain the Christianity in that region and also this old nation. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Kamal, what risks do local advocates face when challenging these systems from within, and how can international actors support them without reinforcing backlash or isolation?
I think in Sudan, the people protested and they changed the system for freedom. And in 2019, we started with the civilian government, and their slogan for that protest and revolution was actually 3 things: freedom, justice, and peace. And I think these are very basic for religious freedom, because we are not demanding religious freedom, actually freedom for everybody. And without freedom, there is problems. And of course, also justice is very key. And justice means equality between citizens. And of course, there is violation of this. And so after the civilian government came, asking for these 3 things, which include peace, because there is no peace without justice. There was a coup, and the coup took away these freedoms again. And today, we have a war. 14 million displaced people, 10 million within the country, 4 million outside the country, and they are suffering. Even the UN is not able to help the displaced people in other countries and inside the country because they don't have finance. So many people are facing hunger, but nobody is talking about it. But to bring peace, you need to bring justice. And justice means equality. It means freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. It means freedom of expression. And I think we have to live the talk, as our sister said here. Without walking the talk, these things will not change. And today Sudan is suffering and the world is quiet. There is a lot about other countries, but Sudan is not mentioned. And even for relocation of people, it is very difficult. The Minister of Development for UK was in Chad. And the lady asked him, is it difficult? And the poor man, he wept. He wept because the situation is really bad. And my plea is to put pressure. For Sudan to succeed, we have to have a civilian government. The army must be out of politics, and then there will be equal citizens. Religious freedom is very crucial. It is because it is a part of freedom. Freedom of expression is important. This means removing blasphemy laws, because it makes people accountable when we have the right to question, criticize, and it will protect the individual within the religion from being abused. So analytic thinking is very key. And then, of course, the justice, also to judge the perpetrator of the crime, like he mentioned in Nigeria, what is mentioned here. Because, for example, the head of Syria now has been a terrorist, but he has not been judged for the crimes he has done. And so we need justice to judge the ones who committed the crimes. We cannot be quiet about this. And it is for the sake of the victims and for stopping people from continuing with the crime. So over 140,000 people died in Sudan now because of this war.
Right, thank you. Keyvan, I'm just gonna, on that note, I'm just gonna ask you as well, when you're trying to create awareness about the community, the suffering of your community, there is obviously threats that advocates face. How do you balance that need for awareness and visibility with the need for safety?
I believe that we need to be consistent on talking about our rights from equal citizenship and freedom of religion, and that needs to be challenged with our society sometimes, and we need to take that risks sometimes for the betterment of our societal reformation. However, we believe also that the institutions should be reformed, sometimes by the outside pressure, sometimes by the intellectual people in that country, and sometimes probably because the people reach to a point that they don't see any reason for this the continuousness of the prosecutions to others. The awareness needs to be taught since childhood. The awareness of humankind is the oneness of humankind should be taught from the childhood. You cannot pressure other societies to believe what you believe unless it is a consciousness method have done to them. What we challenged in Yemen, that we approach the society and approach the authorities in a way that we are existing. Either you accept it or either you don't accept it. We are here. We don't take arms against them. We don't have, we have always constructive methods that we want to build and share with others how to build the community. Religion is something very private, and it's all about talking and reaching to that awareness. It's a hard job. It's a very, very hard job. Not every society will accept, but with consistency, I believe it will reach to that point.
Thank you, Kamal. Funke, you've seen how we have frameworks, we have policies, we have so much that looks great on paper, but not in practice. What does religious freedom really mean for someone who's poor, who's detained, or legally invisible? And how should our global frameworks change to reflect that reality?
I think we need to platform religious freedom around other human rights ideal. Because like he said, religion is private. And when you leave it within the construct of religion alone, you risk subjecting it to this box of secrecy. And so I'm looking at it from the fact that for religion, it's freedom to thrive. You need to look at expanding expression, expanding the civic space, strengthening our justice institutions, and also even strengthening other institutions that makes expression to thrive. And so it's important that we platform religious freedom in such a way that everyone understands that we are all concerned about this. And in my context in Nigeria, it's not just about the minority community in the Middle Belt part of Nigeria or in this particular community where they have all of these challenges, but it's something that affects every one of us. So that's the first thing. The second thing will be the need to always also make the voices of the persons in these underrepresented communities visible, because oftentimes the people that are affected by this, again, are poor, are socioeconomically disadvantaged, they don't have access to the kind of support that you would ordinarily get. And they also have not been able to receive the kind of support or the kind of access that people would ordinarily get. And so we must continue to tell their stories. We must find innovative ways to tell their stories. The case I mentioned earlier, it was because the particular church session was live streamed. That's why we knew what happened. In the past, the government would have just come and, and say that, that did not happen, or that number of people were not abducted and all of that. So I think it's important that we find innovative ways. And how do we do that? Collaboration, right? One of the things I'm excited about is the fact that in this, at the summit, we have different groups. We have the religious communities, we have the civil society community, we have government bodies. And so we must find a way to ensure that even those that are affected, also their voices are heard, and then their stories are made visible. Yes.
Very practical insights again. Thank you so much for that. Today's conversation reminds us that while religious freedom is not only violated through dramatic acts of violence, but through silence, neglect, and selective attention. And if these voices remain underreported, it's not because they are marginal, but because our systems of listening are. So thank you once again to all our panelists for their honesty, for your vulnerability, for your courage. I don't know if we have time for some questions from the audience. 2 minutes? Okay, 2 questions? Okay. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, you can come here and use this mic in front. Yes. Oh, there's a mic here for them.
Hello, my name is Laura Kelly. I cover foreign policy for The Hill. To Funke, I'm actually going to speak with Nigeria's First Lady tomorrow, so I just kind of wanted to get a sense of U.S.-Nigeria relations, and President Trump has made a big focus on protecting Christian communities, and has his actions actually translated into positivity, and what more can the Nigerian government do?
Okay, I would say that to a very large extent, the U.S.-Nigerian relationship has created a torchlight on the religious issues in Nigeria. I was reading through the news, and I saw that there was actually an arrest of certain assailants who attacked a Christian community last year. Over 150 people were killed, massacred, over 1,000 displaced. Now, oftentimes when you go to the news, we see the cases of these destructions, but we never see people being persecuted. And then it's interesting to see that people are being persecuted. The case of Sunday Jackson that I mentioned earlier, he was granted pardon during the Christmas, and that was because the US was involved in engaging with the Nigerian government. And I can go on and on around a lot of things that have improved in the past couple of months since the US government became interested in Nigeria, even down to designating Nigeria a country of particular concern, which back home, people are a bit polarized around if we really needed to be designated that way, but that's a different conversation. So as you engage our First Lady, I would say that one of the ways that helps us in Nigeria, and I think in most parts of the Global South, to get attention of our government is through international engagements like this. So I think it will be very critical to mention the fact that there are intersectional issues that arise from religious freedom not being addressed properly. Women and children bear the brunt of it. I say this because I know the First Lady is someone that is big on issues relating to gender and whatnot. So you might want to raise the fact that this is a pressing issue. This is an issue that should be put in focus. And also, I think the broader conversation also around strengthening our justice system, because a lot of the challenges that we find are just pure governance failures from the justice system. So whatever way she can support or go back and talk to the first man or the parliament, whatever way, and they have the power to actually make some work done. And we could speak further after this conversation if you're keen to it.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? That's all right. All right, thank you once again. Can we have a round of applause for all our panelists? Thank you so much for your time.